So earlier this week, we spoke about Femship Hero and just why so many failed actors and failed screenplay writers like Ben Shapiro end up working on conservative media and how they often fail quite badly to appeal to younger audiences because conservatism is just inherently not as appealing to younger audiences because it's all about upholding the status quo. Now, while I was making that video, I had in the back of my mind this video, so today we're going to be talking about conservative comedy and why it is often so bad. And you guys can already imagine most conservative comedy is pretty bad because there's nothing subversive about it, and often good comedy has a bit of subversiveness to it. But what I also want to talk about today is how a lot of these conservatives talk about how much they love George Carlin. Now, you guys remember, I made a whole video about this, and that video is way more in detail about George Carlin's politics. But because we're going to talk about Dave Rubin in this video, I thought it'd be nice, because I know Dave Rubin specifically loves George Carlin, to contrast the comedy clips I'm going to show you today versus George Carlin's brand of comedy. Now, I don't particularly love stand-up comedians myself. I don't find stand-up comics that funny. I find the whole dynamic between the comedian and the audience quite manufactured sometimes, and yeah, I get comedians need that energy. It just feels a bit fake and forced, especially with a lot of American audiences, because you have like so-called comedians like Bill Maher having their shows where his crowd will just applaud anything he says. A lot of you informed me in my Bill Maher video last week. They're told to do this, which isn't surprising, but still they go wild for absolutely everything he says. Essentially, his comedy is say something and people cheer. Not very good comedy in my opinion. So we're going to look at all of that today, but before we get any further, if you want to support my channel, please consider liking the video. And I guess for today's comment, people let me know, are there any funny conservative comedians? Like, please let me know, is there actually a funny conservative comedian? There are plenty of funny conservative actors, like we talked about this in the last video. Mel Gibson has been very funny in specific roles. Vince Vaughn as well. Tim Allen is very funny. There are funny conservative people, but I can't think of too many like outward GOP supporting comedians that are actually funny. So let me know in the comments, is there any funny conservatives out there? Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. I want to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and the benefits of that are getting my Nintendo Switch friend code and access to the private patrons Discord server. Also, follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, on Instagram. Come join our subreddit, the link is in the description, and subscribe to my second YouTube channel, the Kavernacle Extra, where I archive my live streams that I do 2 times a week. So before we get into some comedy clips of conservative comedians, I wanted to read out some conservative jokes and we can kind of discuss why these are so bad. Now, it's from a book called A Collection of Conservative Comedy by Michael P. Westhead. And basically he says, all these jokes are all original material and I've made every effort not to be a hack. That is, I've tried as much as possible not to use stupid or reruns of jokes. For instance, in the religion section, I initially had a joke where the priest said, nice pants, Noah, where's the flood? It was removed when I was reminded by my mother that this joke is older than she is. Off to a good start right there. So let's get into some of these jokes. So are you guys ready to laugh your heads off? So, joke. So, question, why is Obama a socialist? Answer, every president wants to leave a legacy. Obama wants to leave his marks. I mean, is that meant to be funny? The joke being that Obama is a communist and he wants to leave his mark, but it's spelt like Karl Marx. That's haha, so funny. Here's another one. What is the easiest way to drive a liberal crazy? Tell them you're pro-choice. You believe in a woman's right to choose as long as she chooses life. Oh my God. Hilarious. Very, very funny. Basically, you're just saying the conservative position, which is very, very horrible. I don't know what's funny about that. So another one on the topic of Sarah Palin. Why is the ice in Alaska melting? Answer, Sarah Palin is hot. Whoa, so funny. Why are Democrat women jealous of Sarah Palin? A, she has an abundance of natural resources. Oh, a nice bit of objectifying women there. That's pretty funny. Another gut-busting conservative joke. The New Testament is the only piece of literature that's 2,000 years old, and they still call it new. If it's so new, where's the book tour? George Bush knock-knock joke. George Bush, knock-knock. Obama, who's there? George Bush, people that make $250K a year. Obama, people that make $250K a year who? George Bush, man, are you obsessed with people that make $250K a year? I don't really understand what the joke is. Did Obama say he was going to raise taxes on people who make $250K a year or something? Even that, even if that is it, it's just an absolutely terrible joke, terrible execution. So one more. Every year when I do taxes, I feel like my accountant is checking my prostate. What's scary is when you look at the world, it spells pro-state. This is why I call it a policy of tax and bend. So are you in hysterics after me reading you a bunch of conservative jokes? Now, I read someone saying this somewhere, forgot who said it. They're basically saying, conservative comedy is not even meant to be funny. It's just meant to be saying a thing you recognise and that's the joke. Or you're trying to say their political position and that's the funny part. So the funny part of that Obama joke was you're calling Obama a communist. It doesn't matter how you frame it. It's just the fact you try to tell a joke in which you say Obama is a communist. Like, that is funny, apparently. That is funny. There's also the element that conservatives are just very, very bad at constructing jokes. And we're going to get into this when we play some of the clips, because I fully believe in some of the stuff that we're going to watch, you could make a funny joke about this, but I'm coming from a left-wing perspective, and these people are often attacking liberals, right? So I believe you could make a funny joke about what they're talking about, but these people just cannot construct the funny joke, and it feels like conservative comedy is just all about, like, referencing some political position you hold without trying to be funny. Also, can everyone please like the video, because I've had to sit through really bad conservative comedy, and it's bad enough watching conservative pundits talk about politics. This is another level, but thankfully the Majority Report had my back, and I had to kind of watch all these clips through them, because I just can't sit through like hours of conservative comedy and conservatives being really unfunny, because it just makes me cringe too bad. But here is one about Greg Gutfeld, who obviously had this really, really bad comedy show. I don't even know if it's still on the air, on Fox. I'm going to show you two clips of his. I'm going to go through the first one first. Basically, he has a segment where it has a fake news reporter, basically being like CNN, I guess. And the joke is, this news station is obsessed with Donald Trump, and they're trying to tie everything bad that happens back to Donald Trump. So take a look at this hilarious clip. I am sorry if you guys cringe. I watched it, so now you guys have to watch it.
All Trump News Network. Here he is.
Buckets are having a hard time drying out from the Trump era, even though they can call it a day at 4:30 in the afternoon while President Biden's digesting his early bird tapioca. It's almost like they'll find a Trump connection to any news item out there. And one network is cornering the market.
You're watching ATN, all Trump news, because everything else is boring by comparison.
I'm Anderson Lemon with the headlines. The annual Global Retirement Index is out with its latest list of the best places in the world to spend your golden years. Topping the list this year, Costa Rica, followed by Panama and Mexico. Sources say if Trump is elected in 2024, we can expect all Americans to retire and move to literally any country where Trump is not president. And I'll be on the first plane to Bermuda with a suitcase full of edibles. Police in Georgia say a weekend traffic jam was caused by a loose cow running along Interstate 285 near Atlanta, possibly spooked by a phone call from Donald Trump. Cars were at a standstill for about an hour until police were able to safely capture the cow and return it to its owner. Sources say this never would have happened if Donald Trump had an infrastructure plan that consisted of more than just turning wayward cattle into well-done steak. I swear, I do not know how we ever survived that guy. And a new study shows that people cannot tell the difference between screams of joy and screams of terror. Researchers at Emory University say the two types of screams have similar acoustics. For example, if I attended a Sugar Ray concert in the 90s, sheer joy. Ah! Whereas if I attended a Trump rally, unmitigated terror. Ah! Thank God I'll never have to see those again. I mean, all those happy people with the flags and the children and the grandparents and the YMCA. Ah! Makes me sick to my stomach.
So I guess the joke being, in this little segment trying to parody CNN, is that a lot of the liberal media are so obsessed with Donald Trump, they'll just blame everything bad on Donald Trump. Now, I think there could be a good joke here, and maybe a good sketch here. So if I was in the writer's room for Gutfeld, I would think about, like, let's have examples where the liberal media were way too obsessed with Trump. Here's a good example. They once showed an empty podium at a Trump rally while Bernie Sanders was giving his own rally, like, live, right? They chose to instead show an empty podium. That shows that, like, Liberals are obsessed with Donald Trump and they just want to cover him, and it's like the spectacle. Maybe there's something there for a joke, like how obsessed they are with this guy. But instead, you're making up fake scenarios and then having them blame it on Trump. And these scenarios are just so random. Like, you cannot relate to these situations where maybe liberals did blame Trump for everything, because these scenarios do not resemble reality. So it's not funny. Like, it's not a commentary on anything. You're just making stuff up and saying, well, the libs will blame it for Trump. Again, it's just terrible comedy. And you guys probably tell me in the comments, like, is there a better angle to come at this? I bet there is a funny joke in liberal media being obsessed with Trump. This is just not funny, and it's just really, really weird. And that was hard to watch. I watched that again for you guys. I literally watch it right now, and it's very, very hard and painful to watch that. But this one was not as bad. So now I just want to watch another clip from the Gutfeld show, because there's a segment where he parodies Brian Williams and CNN.
Debut, and it's on at 11 p.m.
Look at this.
Here's
It's got the Jeb exclamation point at the end of it.
yeah, it's Gutfeld.
That's why he has that eating grin on his face.
Here we go. Listen to this. This is part of the monologue.
You all made a great choice. For proof, over at MSNBC, let's see what Brian Williams is up to right now.
Good evening, I'm Brian Williams, and I am on Mars. Yes, I jumped on a chopper and now I'm on Mars. I've been here for a year now. I built a castle here made of mastodon carcasses and marshmallows. This is where I invented all the COVID vaccines, as well as penicillin, the smartphone, and fluffernutter.
Some things never change. Meanwhile, what's on CNN?
You, sir, are a racist. White male racist.
You're the racist. Awful.
That's from the Don Lemon Hour, who reports the news with the same look your mother gave you when she found weed in your sock drawer. As for those late night shows we're supposed to compete against, why bother? Who do they offend?
This segment ran a year ago, right? And they're making fun of Brian Williams because he lied about the scenario in which he covered the Iraq War, made it seem like it was way more dangerous when it was for him. That happened in 2015, right? 2015. Did people even remember that? Like, does this Gutfeld's audience even remember that? Even if there is something there for a joke, here is a news anchor you're trying to make fun of who lied about something, but then it's just so not relatable. Like, he's on Mars and he's talking about like building a castle. Like, that's what I mean. It's so divorced from reality. There's no commentary there. There's no subversion there. It's just not funny. You've just made up a random scenario. And I guess the joke is Brian Williams lied that one time and got fired in 2015. That's the joke. That's the joke. How is that a joke? It's so, so bad. Like I said, there could maybe be a joke there with a better writer. You could make fun of someone like that. But again, Brian Williams has done more stuff since then. You could make fun of him for other things like that. And the impression is not even good. It doesn't even sound like him. It makes me more depressed is that there are people being paid a lot of money to write this show and they have no talent. I'm guessing they might also come from the Ben Shapiro school of thought that if they couldn't make it in liberal circles in Hollywood, like they couldn't get a gig writing for a late night TV show, they would probably blame the woke agenda for not liking their conservative views, not that they're just completely talentless and they do not understand what makes a funny joke. And then of course you saw that CNN clip where they're just telling each other how racist they are. Like, what's the joke there again? Like, people on CNN and liberals call each other racist all the time. Like, funny, I guess. I'll admit I have quite a high tolerance. Like, I don't find a lot of things funny, but come on, no one watching this can tell me anything I've shown you so far is actually funny. And it just shows the problem with conservative comedy is that because they're so beholden to upholding the status quo, they just can't challenge anything in a funny way, and their attacks are so poorly done that they just can't seem to construct a good comedy segment about anything because they don't make it contemporary, they don't make it relatable, they don't like satire current events or anything, just make up some absolutely random nonsense. But now let's move on a bit. Now this one was hard for me to watch as well, but it speaks to conservative comedy not actually having a joke, because the joke is literally just like a reference to something. Like the joke in the Brian Williams one was he lied. The joke with the Trump one was liberals obsessed with Trump. So there's a lot of Dave Rubin stuff out there. I literally could not bring myself to watch most of it. I'm really, really sorry. If there's any other YouTubers watching this, there is a better video to be made than this one right now. You just have to have the stomach to watch a lot more conservative comedy than I do. But here is Dave Rubin. You might have seen this. Dressed in, I guess, drag, pretending to be someone on The View. You know, that like wine mum liberal show that Meghan McCain and Whoopi Goldberg are on. So here is him pretending he's another member of this. Like, he's not even trying to be Meghan McCain, which I thought was weird because he has a blonde wig. So let's have a look at this Dave Rubin clip.
Over to Russia. They used to actually investigate stuff like this, and I guess now, you know, there seems to be no bars.
What are you two crazy bitches talking about? What are you talking about? You want to arrest people who are different than you politically? Tulsi Gabbard? She's a member of our military. She's a former congresswoman, a Democrat. You just don't like her, so you want to arrest her? You want to arrest Tucker Carlson, the very dapper Tucker Carlson. What are you saying? You guys are nuts. You're just nuts. I only agreed to do this show because I thought that Whoopi was sane. She was good. Sister Act 2. Anna's just nuts. I don't even know what she's doing here. The other one's a racist, and there's the drunk one. What are we all doing here?
He's also pointing in the wrong directions relative to where he's looking on the set. But go ahead.
Come to hate. You know that? Why am I here?
Yeah.
I need a haircut.
Good question.
So I'm struggling to even understand what the joke is there. Like, what is actually the joke? The joke is you've got on The View to tell people there how crazy they are for wanting to like charge people like Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard with like treason or something like that. Okay. I fully believe you could make a very good satire of The View. I don't like The View. I think it just props up a lot of the status quo things. They have a lot of liberal people on it. Don't really say much of value. I think you can make a very good satire of The View, in my opinion. I don't understand what this is. What Dave Rubin is a new member of The View, just telling everyone they're crazy, references Whoopi Goldberg being in Sister Act. That's the joke. Like, seriously? That is the joke? Is that funny? How are these people, like stand-up comedians, how do these people have so-called careers in comedy? I just do not understand. There is not even an attempt at a joke. I would respect it way more if a conservative, and some do, come out and try and tell jokes. Like, try and make me laugh. Try and say something funny. Not just, haha, reference, liberals crazy. That is the joke right there. It's just so bad. And I'm really sorry I've put you through these 3 clips and the cover joke at the start. I just can't understand how they don't understand how comedy works at all. And being conservative probably helps in this regard. It makes you less creative. You have to be more beholden to the status quo. I think fundamentally conservatives are not as creative because they're stuck in these confines, because if they started being more critical of things that actually exist in our society rather than made up things like liberals taking over everything, critical race theory, all this nonsense they make up, they could actually be a lot more funny. Now, before we go into a really good article I read in the Daily Beast about why conservative comedy is not actually funny, I thought I would connect the comedy stuff to Dave Rubin also loving George Carlin. Now, George Carlin, extremely famous American comedian who's been dead for like 15 years nearly or something like that. Very famous for being a massive lover of free speech. Now, because he was such a lover of free speech, he has seemed to gain quite an audience in conservative circles. Now, in the video I was talking about, I showed you like subreddits, like Stephen Crowder subreddit, conservative subreddits, where they're all talking about how much they love George Carlin. And I'm just going to show you a couple clips to show you how much he would hate those types. But Dave Rubin loves George Carlin as well. So here is him before talking to George Carlin's daughter, talking about how great George Carlin is.
My guest this week is Kelly Carlin, daughter of the legendary comedian George Carlin. Kelly is an author and a speaker whose work connects many of the dots her father's life was all about. I've known Kelly for about 4 years now after connecting with her on Twitter because of how much I admired her dad. We've become great friends. Kelly has welcomed me into her world and the comedy community she's part of here in LA. I thought Kelly would be the perfect guest this week, not only because of her new book about growing up as a Carlin, but also because of all the issues her father's comedy was about that have become central themes of what we do here on this show. George Carlin was a relentless defender of free speech, using words and language to push the limits of what society found acceptable at the time. He railed against political correctness like no other comic before or anybody since. He dissected the absurdities of life that ultimately bring us together rather than rip us apart. I can't tell you how often I'm watching some campaign nonsense or some ridiculous politically correct crusade and think, man, I wish George Carlin was still alive to tackle this.
Okay, so Dave Rubin loves George Carlin, maybe an inspiration for him to getting into stand-up comedy, which I find very ironic. Now, the reason Conservatives love George Carlin is pretty much for this one stand-up clip where he says every slur you can think of and then talks about why it's okay to say that. I'm just going to play you the clip.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with any of those words in and of themselves. They're only words. It's the context that counts. It's the user. It's the intention behind the words that makes them good or bad. The words are completely neutral. The words are innocent. I get tired of people talking about bad words and bad language. It's the context that makes them good or bad.
All right, so if Conservatives see that, they think, well, George Carlin says, well, you liberal snowflakes getting offended by words. I would totally not be on your side if I was alive in 2022. But then they seemingly ignore everything else he ever said in his life. George Carlin was clearly on the left, even though he was a free speech like absolutist in his own words. He was clearly on the left. He hated the rich. He hated capitalism. He hated Republicans. He hated Christian conservatives. He hated all these people. And the reason his comedy was good is he was satirizing like contemporary life, and he was satirizing the absurdity of contemporary life. He was also satirizing the powerful. He was punching up. And like he said in his own words, good comedy punches up. It doesn't punch down. Like a lot of conservative comedy seems to be making fun of trans people, gay people, SJWs, or people who want racial equality. George Carlin didn't do that, and that's why his comedy was so good. And that's why left-wing comedy is actually funny, because it does things that people can relate to and points to like the absurdity of these things, and it's told in a funny way. Just having those things inherently in your comedy does not make it funny, but you can make it humorous. Like, I don't think George Carlin is like laugh out loud funny, but it's humorous to me, and the way he tells the joke is funny in its own way. So I just want to play in the clip of him being interviewed by Larry King, where he says about like punching down is bad comedy.
I would defend to the death his right to do everything he does. The thing that I find unusual, and it's, you know, it's not a criticism so much, but his targets are underdogs. And comedy traditionally has picked on people in power, people who abuse their power. Women and gays and immigrants are kind of, to my way of thinking, underdogs. And, you know, he ought to be careful because he's Jewish. And a lot of the people who want to pick on these kind of groups, the Jews are on that list.
So there you go, woke SJW George Carlin. Now I just want to play you two more clips to really shatter the illusion George Carlin would be a conservative. So there's a clip of him on Bill Maher where he talks about the rich extracting from the poor, and I think a conservative on it calling him Karl Marx, and him rebuking him and calling George Bush a fash, which is quite nice, just like Bill Maher used to do as well. And then another clip where he says his famous line, "It's a big club and you're not in it."
It shouldn't be a surprise that rich white men don't care about poor black people, period. So they're not high on their list. They're not high on their list.
George,
they're
I love you, George,
They're not
but that's
high. I don't care
nonsense.
if you love me or not.
That's
They're
nonsense.
not high on the conscious or the subconscious list of those people who are in charge of things in this country. The owners, forget these foolish elections, the owners of this country don't care about the poor in general.
The owners of this country, what are we going... is this Karl Marx talking to me? The owners of this country are the voters of this country.
You're wrong about that, my friend.
Aren't the owners of this country the voters in this country who elected George Bush?
No, they're not. Listen, politics, these elections are a charade. The real looting in this country takes place in the transfer of the wealth from the poor to the rich. I'm sorry that you don't like class and the truth, my friend, but you're just stuck with it. Poor have been systematically looted in this country. The rich have been made richer under this criminal, fascist president and his government.
They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. They're coming for your Social Security money. They want your retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this place. It's a big club. And you ain't in it.
So there you go, woke SJW George Carlin, who is apparently an inspiration for a lot of conservative comedians, talking about class consciousness, talking about how bad capitalism is, and this line about it's a big club and you're not in it. Conservatives like to appropriate this and say, well, George Carlin was talking about like the liberal media, liberal Hollywood, woke politics, and the woke agenda of like leftist corporations. But it's clear he was not talking about that. He was just talking about the rich elite in general. It is so laughable that people like Dave Rubin love him, Joe Rogan love him, all these different people, when he is so much more left-wing than these guys. And part of his appeal is his left-wing politics. Like, these are very good segments for anyone to listen to because they're true and they cut through the BS. I know, like, he's not politically correct and all those things, but it cuts through the BS and it appeals to, I guess, most people with his message. So again, totally laughable. Lots of conservatives love this guy. If you want more on George Carlin and the conservative love for him, please check out my other video on him. But then I thought I would end the video reading a little bit of this really good article by the Daily Beast, talking about the reasons, which I haven't spoke about, why conservative comedy is so bad. And conservative comedy would be a lot better if maybe they took a couple cues from Carlin himself. So let's get into this article. Here's what conservative comedians keep getting wrong. For conservatives to be funny, they would have to be self-aware, yet thick-skinned, opinionated, yet open-minded, irreverent, yet perceptive. It's not impossible, but it's awfully rare. Another problem with conservatives who want to be funny is that they lack empathy and self-awareness necessary to connect with people in that way. People who are successfully funny know themselves well enough to understand exactly why a person might find them ridiculous, even if the point of their joke is to explain to their audiences why, despite these things, their ridiculousness makes a kind of twisted sense. Others rely on an external sensitivity in order to communicate observations about others. In order to do this, the funny person must understand who they are, how other people think and feel, and why. I am a funny and cool guy who is right all the time isn't a funny persona, it's just an a-hole persona. Everybody else has gone crazy except me, and if you're not laughing, so have you, isn't funny, it's alienating. Gutfeld, like all who failed before, lacks the self-awareness to admit his faults and the empathy to understand his audiences. He's a clown that, rather than assembling animal balloons, shows up to the children's party and yells something at the kids about Brian Williams. That would have been kind of funny in 2015, it's like the clip I showed you. A lot of good comedy is about observing and ridiculing power, whether real or imagined. The fact that modern conservatism has evolved into a cult with no ideology beyond having Donald Trump as a dictator would be great makes that a bit more difficult. Falling in line isn't funny and can never be, and it defangs any conservative attempts to ridicule liberals for their perceived, unquestioning allegiance to progressive orthodoxy. Sacred cows are the enemy of humour. So I summed up my thoughts nicely and obviously included references to the clip we watched. And I think it makes very good points about stuff I didn't really talk about. Because yes, comedians invent scenarios all the time. Most things comedians tell jokes about, which seem like low relatable humour, aren't things that actually happen to them. But there is an attempt there because they understand that this relatability is what makes things funny. And like the article was saying, even if it seems a bit ridiculous, you have to ground it in reality to make the joke funny. But the problem with the conservative comedy, it's not grounded in reality. Like those Gutfeld segments, they're not satirizing reality. They don't even seem like anything you've ever seen before. It's just made up stuff, like that Brian Williams joke. I'm Brian Williams lying about being on Mars. It's just not funny. Because it's way too absurd, and you haven't set up the joke enough for us to find this funny at all. But also I think the article touches on a really good point that conservatives are way too thin-skinned. Like, you don't get too many conservatives who can do self-deprecating humour because they're way too fragile to make fun of themselves, because a lot of these people are just horribly insecure. The insecurity radiates so strongly from people like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, often manifesting itself in anger. Like, Ben Shapiro has been memed for a lot of things. You don't think he would be very okay with self-deprecating humor about himself, like making fun of his voice and how quick he speaks, making fun of like his poor arguments, or only debating college students. He's too insecure to do that. The same with Steven Crowder. So I think you need that self-deprecation and to acknowledge your own flaws and acknowledge your own like bad qualities to construct something that is funny and relatable. So I think criticising liberals could be funny. I just don't think conservatives have the capacity to make it funny from their point of view, because the point of view is liberals hysterical, ridiculous and obsessed with Trump, and Brian Williams lies. Not funny. So anyway, that is it for the video. I'm very sorry I made you watch and listen to conservative comedy. If you want to support my channel, please like the video, comment, subscribe. Also consider becoming a patron, join my subreddit, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.